Hi, and welcome to the Ladies in Biz podcast, where every week we have guests that are amazing female entrepreneurs. Find out how they got started and grew their business. Discover how their story can help you grow your business. Thanks for tuning in today. Here is your host, Penny Redmond.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ladies in Biz. And we have another amazing guest. We have Avra Fainer. Hello, Avra. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Oh, good. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited about our listeners getting to hear what you have to share with us, because we're going to hear your great story, and we're going to hear some great stuff about learning how to speak. So let's get going. I'm going to read your bio first, just to get us started, okay?
Perfect.
So then we have a context of who you really are.
Sure.
Your passion, just like mine, is mentoring women to massively grow their confidence, their success, and their companies using power of presentations. She teaches her clients to communicate with influence about their products and services, and to more effectively share their value with the world. Avra's expertise is honed from over 20 years of live theatrical and vocal performance and experience. You don't look like you're much over 20, so you must have started when you were, 9.
I was 9. I was.
Anyway, her approach helps clients to use those same theatrical techniques to raise big dollars using those performance and presentation skills that you can offer. You focus first on mastering the context of delivery, which is mindset, stage presence, vocal power, and we're going to really get into that. And making sure that all your necessary components are there for the killer presentation. And I know we've already talked about this. Of course, people probably know that sometimes we plan podcasts a little bit ahead. And so we've had a long chat. So I'm so excited about getting into this, Avra, because I know that you've got a great story and you've got a lot to teach us today.
Thanks. I'm excited. Yeah.
Me too. So anyway, so I want to, if you can just give us a background. I know I sort of just let the cat out of the bag about 9 years ago, but if you can just give us an understanding of what brought you to be an entrepreneur at this point in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I started acting when I was about 9 years old. And so that's the basis of everything I do nowadays. But in terms of becoming an entrepreneur, being an actor was one of those things where it was a very hard career. And so at some point I switched over to coaching people, and I love coaching. When I started, I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing. I just basically started helping people with various different things. And then shortly after that, I got certified in high performance coaching. And so what that is that's actually built on 5 pillars. So that's clarity, energy, courage, productivity, and influence. And so that was a great program. That's great coaching. And what happened was some of my clients in the high performance coaching started saying, hey, you've got this background in theater. You've got this ability to present that I would really love to learn from you about. And so it was a natural progression. Basically, it moved from being that high performance coaching to being my presentation coaching naturally, because that was what people were asking me for.
It's so interesting because I hear so many businesses where they've come and started in some way, and then they move into a different direction. And it's primarily because people are saying, I need this.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
Yeah.
I just had an email today, and I'm so grateful for people saying, can you do this? I'm going, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, of course I can. Yeah, perfect. Done.
Yeah, especially with your background too, which is amazing.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit more, because I know I have here in my notes, talk about mindset, vocal, presentation, persona, and I guess you've got 5 things that we kind of want to talk about when we're talking about presentations and stuff. So do you want to lead in with that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I call them the drop the mic principles, because, when you're really rocking your talk, you drop that mic at the end of it. That's what we aim for. So the first piece that we work on when I work with my clients is on breath work and vocal work, vocal exercises. And then we go into what we would call a presentation persona. And I can talk more about that after, once we actually jump into that. And then I work with people on mindset and confidence. My next point that I work on is rehearsal know-how. And that is basically making sure that when you're rehearsing, you know what you're doing. And again, we can talk more about that in a little bit. And then the last piece that I work on with people is body language. And so that's super important. Definitely one of the things that makes the biggest difference when you're getting in front of people. So those are my 5 drop the mic principles.
And then you lead everyone through each one of those.
Yeah.
So I know when we were talking, we were saying about how speaking has changed so quick, it not drastically, but certainly people's expectations of how you speak is I think there's higher standards, or people that have higher standards now, because there's people like yourself that are here to coach us to make sure that we do a much better job at presenting our brand. And presenting our brands are so important, and there's so many entrepreneurs that have to do that.
Yeah.
So one of the things we had talked about, and I love having conversations about, is about being authentic.
Yeah.
And how can you be authentic?
Right. So for me, the concept of authenticity is one of those that I think a lot of people don't quite understand, because people think to be authentic, you got to turn on the camera and be like, hi, this is me. Hi.
No, this is what we did. Scary.
Right. Yeah. And that's what people think authenticity is. And I don't think that's actually the case at all. I think you can be authentic and still know what you're saying. And I think that's a big pillar of that, of what I was actually talking about there in terms of mindset and confidence. Because when you're just sort of turning the camera on or getting in front of an audience and going for it, it can be really hard to actually come across as somebody who is intelligent, as somebody who has their stuff in order. Whereas if you even if you turn the camera on and this is my basic concept, this is my one thing that I want to talk about, or my 2 things that I want to talk about, you can still be totally authentic, totally vulnerable, get yourself out there, but be doing that with a sense of confidence and with a sense of actually knowing what you're saying. Makes a huge difference in terms of authenticity.
So most of us, because, in your profession, you've had a ton of training when it comes to voice. And for us, people that have never done stuff like that, I was actually going to say normal people, but it's not normal people. It's like it's abnormal to be an entertainer or something.
Well, sometimes.
No, not at all. So tell me about the voice, because I know that is something that probably most of us are pretty concerned about, because we haven't had, professional vocal training. So can you give us some tips on that?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that I say about vocal training is that you really want to go in there warm. And what that means is you want to actually take the time to warm up your voice before you talk, before you get on a podcast or a camera or in front of an audience. And vocal warm-ups can be super basic. Like, they don't have to be really complicated. So some of the things I teach, for example, are just going through scales. So a scale would just be, if you choose a note, and you can, if you want to be super diligent about it, you can pull up an app on your phone and find a note. So, choose middle C or something like that. But if you're being, somebody who is just, I just want to try this out, choose a note. So, and then you can just hum up a scale. So, right? So that's just a very basic vocal warm-up. You can just do that. Choose the next note.
It almost becomes more mindful as well, and calm as well.
Absolutely.
Right? So more than just working the voice.
That's it, is that you're getting yourself into that grounded space where you know that your voice is going to be there. I do the same thing with breath work, right? When I teach people breathing exercises, it does the same thing mentally. In addition to actually warming up your breath and warming up your voice, it gets you to a point mentally where you're like, okay, I'm super grounded. I'm super ready to get in front of people. So things like vocal scales, things like using diction exercises, like tongue twisters, and getting your you're getting your mouth warmed up. Those are all super important as well. So pretty much anything that you can do to really get yourself warm before you're getting in front of an audience starts to make a real difference to the way you come across.
So drink water before before you get up to speak is probably pretty important.
It's super important. Water is one of the most important things. And while you're talking as well, I mean, I don't have my water bottle with me, but I would usually actually grab my water bottle and drink it fairly often to make sure that my voice stays happy while I'm actually doing something like a podcast or a recording.
So funny, so do I. I normally have water right beside me just in fear if I start coughing or something and I can't stop. But so the other thing I know in some of your other pillars is also talking about body language. And I know we've had a great conversation about that because there's things that you do when you're nervous, when you're on stage, if you're not comfortable with it. So can you tell us some of the things you definitely should not do?
Right. So for me, one of the biggest things is hiding. And so that hiding can be a bunch of different ways. You can hide behind a podium, which is one thing that I absolutely do not recommend. Don't hide behind a podium.
How many people do that though?
It's, you know what, it's considered to be common. It's considered to be okay. I don't love it because it's the first thing you're doing is you're hiding your whole body behind something else. And so the audience can't engage with you. You can't really get in front of them and connect with them in the same way if you're behind something. So podiums are no's. We don't like podiums.
No podiums.
No podiums. You can also cross yourself off. And by that, I mean things like crossing your arms or putting your hands on your hips or something like that. Those are ways without necessarily being hiding. They are hiding, right? Because you're actually pulling yourself away from the audience mentally. So we don't want you to close yourself off. We don't want you to hide behind a podium. People think then that if you can't hide behind the podium, that you must pace across the stage. And I will call you out on that as well if I'm teaching you.
You're tough.
I know, I am tough. I'm a tough teacher, but I swear it's because my students, you know, my clients truly benefit from that learning. So pacing.
Not even your hands on your hips, because that would stabilize me, I think.
You know what? You can here and there. Like it's just make sure that it doesn't stay there.
Okay, right? So it's okay to just put it on to make an impression, but not
to make an impression, make a point. And I was going to say the same thing about walking. You can certainly walk back and forth, just don't make that the whole speech. Don't make that your whole time, right?
Okay, now one of the reasons I love a podium is because my legs shake.
Sure.
And it's like, at least then I've got some kind of crutch. So how can you get that past that point? Like if you're so used to having a podium and all of a sudden you don't, is there something you can do to get your mindset so that you're not like that?
So I would come back to the idea of doing breathing exercises, doing vocal exercises, and also knowing what you're going to say. And by knowing what you're going to say, I call that being goal-oriented in how you actually present. So even if you know one thing that you're going to say, or so for me, the way I actually recommend people rehearse a presentation is you need to know your beginning and you need to know your end. The middle can flow. The middle you can play with as long as you know your main points. You know, say 1, 2, and 3. These are the things I'm going to talk about, but you have some freedom within the frame. But if you know what you're going to say, if you've done some breathing exercises or some vocal exercises beforehand, so you've really grounded yourself, and you get on stage, that leg shaking may still happen, but I think it'll be lessened. That's usually where I tell people you'll start to get comfortable. And it's also a practice thing, right? If you're, the more you do it, to your point, if you're somebody who gets in front of a podium regularly and all of a sudden you have to get out, it's going to be hard the first couple of times, but then it'll get easier and all of a sudden your presentation skills will skyrocket.
One thing that I know that I deal with is when I get on stage and when I have a content, I know I've got my beginning, I know I've got my end, and there's that middle part. I kind of like being able to do it just a little bit more organic in some ways. But then I'm always worried. I'm going, oh my goodness, have I talked too long? Like, and is there a trick that you can tell me about, like how to know, like, do you have someone in the audience watching just to give you one time?
You know what? I've actually done that. I've had somebody in the audience giving me signs. You're at 5 minutes, you're at 2 minutes, you're at 1 minute. If you're lucky and you're at a presentation where you have the ability to have a screen up in front of you where you have a timer, that makes it really easy.
Yes.
Worst case scenario, wear a watch, just check it. Just make sure that you're, have some way to figure it out. Because to your point, if you know your beginning and you know your end, let's just say you've got a minute for each one of those. By the time you hit your 9 minutes out of a 10-minute talk, you know you got to go into the end. That makes it easy, right? And then you've got that strong finish that comes out of it at the end of that. So yeah, so definitely within the freedom of the frame, make sure that you have some sense, some context of how long you're going. And even if, for example, you've got your 3 points within a 10-minute talk, you know, you have some idea of that particular point is going to take that amount of time. And you can guide yourself through it while you still have that freedom within the frame.
So practice certainly makes a big difference too, right? The more you practice, I think we talked about it, how I like practicing in the car.
Right.
And before cell phones, people would think you were crazy, but now they think you're talking on the phone.
It's perfect. Now you're talking to Bluetooth. What are you talking about? Of course, I'm just talking to Bluetooth. I'm good. I'm great.
I wasn't rehearsing what I was going to talk about.
No, of course not. So practicing, let's talk about that a little bit. That's a great way, just, you know, being in the car, talking to yourself / talking to, you know, an audience in your mind. So what I suggest people do is visualize, actually. And I always say that's a huge benefit to becoming a better speaker. Is if you use visualization, what you can do is you can create systematic desensitization. And so what that means is, you know, take your speech in your mind. Let's just say, you know, you're going to be presenting in front of 100 people. So, you know, get in the bath, grab a glass of wine, and in your mind, go through that speech to 100 people. And if it doesn't work, you know, if you're having trouble, if you're having, you know, some nervousness, just start again. That's fine. That's what I mean by systematic desensitization is you're becoming desensitized to the idea of getting in front of that audience by mentally going through the process beforehand.
Yeah, so not just about saying it, but visualizing that you're in front of them, and so then you get past that point.
Exactly. Yeah.
I actually like visualizing it too when I'm just getting up in the morning. If I know that I'm going to do a presentation or workshop, I like just taking a minute just to see myself present it and go over and just maybe do it even in short form, so I won't bore myself to death. But I think it does make a difference to visualize it. And I think we were talking too about different tools that you can use now to even help you as well, right?
Yeah, so we were talking a bit about the presentation persona tool. And so I'll talk a bit about that. So people assume that when you have a persona or a role or a character, whatever you want to call it, that you're moving away from being authentic. And I think that was what led us into the authenticity discussion in the first place. But so the way I recommend using a presentation persona is think about it like you're putting on a character, like you're putting on, you know, you're being an actor and you're changing this character, but it's actually you. It's actually you being the very best version of yourself and taking the traits from that character to elevate your performance. So let's just say that, you know, I think of myself as, you know, a high-powered, amazing CEO who makes millions of dollars every year and who gets in front of her audience and they're just enthralled. They're enthralled by me. They can't get enough. And so if I think about myself that way and I get up on stage and I use those same traits, that same confidence, that same ability, you know, that will elevate my presentation because all of a sudden I'll be able to come from it in this mental way of saying, I've got this, you know, my persona will help me to get there in a different way than maybe if I was just me get in front of an audience, right? So you can have multiple personas, you know, for different actual events. You can say for this persona, I want to be, you know, a 30-year-old entrepreneur who's making it big, you know, who's got all of my ducks in a row. Or you can say again, you know, I'm this high-powered, amazing CEO, and you can use different things from different places. But the idea is think about essentially being an actor, creating a role, but applying that to yourself and using those same traits to truly elevate what you're doing in front of people.
Well, you know what? It's so funny because we think about just, you know, us as entrepreneurs and, you know, maybe lots of entrepreneurs are certainly professional speakers.
Right.
But for those that, you know, that we don't talk or speak on a regular basis, it makes it so much easier. But even people that are so beyond successful, like isn't it Beyonce that has a character that she puts herself into?
Sasha Fierce. Oh, yes. Yeah.
So there you go. So, I mean, even people that live on the stage and that is really their life.
Yeah.
And they're on stage for millions of people.
Right.
They still use that as well to be able to help them through it.
It's a great technique. And then, you know what I'll add? If you've created a presentation persona, one of the really great ways that you can actually pull on it and actually use it is called a trigger. And so what I would say is, for example, for me, there's a couple ways that I trigger myself into becoming that person when I get on stage. You can do something very quick and easy, like putting a Post-it note on, on the notes that you have in front of you that says, your presentation persona's name. So that name could be, let's just say Freddie Mercury. Sure. So I've got that note in front of me, and that immediately triggers me. I also, what I really like doing is triggering myself using alarms on my phone. So that kind of thing can work in a bunch of different ways. I can use that for affirmations, but I can also use it for triggers. Like I'm walking in to this speech, I'm looking at my phone and it's going, giving me that same name, or it's giving me that ability to just say, okay, I'm triggering myself right into that amazing elevated mindset.
That is so cool. I can see, I'm actually going to try. I've never done that, by the way.
Yeah.
So I am definitely so going to try that. So
yeah, you should.
I'll let you know how it goes.
Let me know how it goes. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not sure who I'm going to be yet, so I'll have to figure that one out.
Yeah. Well, I have a worksheet that I'm happy to send you, and you can try that out using the worksheet.
Well, I will. That's for sure. Would you be able to share it with everybody?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I think that would be so super.
I will happily share that. I'll share it with you, and then you can share it with the listeners. Absolutely.
Terrific. Excellent. I think they'll be delighted by that. I know I am.
Yeah.
Anything that can help us through getting to be able to speak a little bit more professionally sure is amazing.
Absolutely.
So I know the other day I was telling you about how I was at an event and we had a wonderful speaker. She was absolutely so good. But there was a point where someone had in the audience had asked her a question. And all of a sudden, what happened was she became so focused on that one person,
right,
that then we felt all alienated. So my question is, how do you prevent that? Because you want to satisfy that person's question in the
absolutely
audience,
yeah,
but you also don't want to lose everybody else that is in the audience.
Yeah, and the same technique can apply to both answering questions or doing your Q&A as well as overall speaking. So there's a couple things. One is you want to make sure that you're focusing on the audience as a whole, always, right? So you can focus on one person, but make sure that doesn't take too long. So you're going to focus on one person and then maybe elevate looking at, the whole audience, and then maybe move to another person, and make sure that you're actually able to encompass the whole audience. Another thing about doing a proper Q&A or a Q&A that really works well is you always want to repeat the question so that everybody is included in what somebody has actually said, especially if it's quiet or if there's no mic, but even still. So you want to repeat that question. You want to say to that person, that was a really great question. Thank you for asking that question. And then you want to share the audience, the question answer with the full audience, because that way everybody can learn from that person's question. So you definitely want to make sure that you're not alienating by focusing only on that person. And you also want to make sure that you've given them their due, their, thank you, I appreciate the question, before you bring it away from them and back to the audience.
And repeating it too, I guess, really helps as well, right? Because if everyone can hear it, because lots of times you can't hear it.
Right, exactly. Especially when people are quiet and they're asking a question, you go, oh, okay. If you don't repeat it, then you're immediately in that one-to-one relationship with the person who's asked the question, as opposed to bringing it back to the full audience.
So what happens if that one person then keeps asking you questions because they're genuinely want an answer?
Yeah.
But you're not being able to give it to them. So can you say, hey, you know what? Let's just keep going and let's meet up after. Like, would that be okay?
I do that all the time, actually. I mean, if I don't know the answer to something, I will say, thank you so much for the question. Let me take that away. I will do the research, or I will think about it, or we can talk more after. Totally fine. I mean, the whole idea is you want to get back to the content that everybody can benefit from. And, if you're not sure of something, or if you don't know something, that's okay. Everybody has to learn. Everybody has to keep learning. So take that away. do the research, figure out the answer to the question, and then either come back to that person, or the next time you're presenting, now you have that extra wonderful information to share with the audience so that that question benefited both you and the eventual audience moving forward.
Ah, clever. So just remember, write it down and make sure that you cover it off the next time.
Yeah, and definitely
good feedback as well.
Yeah. Well, right. And definitely you can come back to that person later. You know, I've even done it. Let me take your email. I'm going to go and think about this, or go and do some research so that I can answer the question. And then I will email you so that we can continue that dialogue.
Oh, good suggestion. Because you could say, hey, later on, let's connect with your email and I can give you some more information on this.
Exactly.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, now you probably are asked this same question all the time, but I am curious, and I love asking people questions like this, is what's the biggest mistake you can do when you're being in front of people?
When you're getting in front of an audience?
Oh, yeah.
So there's a couple. I mean, like I was saying, hiding is a big one, just whether it's behind a podium or whether it's behind your body language. Also, it's things like if you're not making eye contact, if you're sort of inside yourself, that'll just, it'll deplete your energy, and it'll deplete the audience's energy. One of the biggest things to remember is that the audience wants you to succeed. The audience isn't going to be happy if you're sitting up there and you're uncomfortable and you're having a hard time. So if you can come across as confident, even if maybe you're not as confident as you want to be, the audience is there. They're rooting for you. They want you to do well, right? So a mistake would be to believe that the audience doesn't want you to do well, or that the audience is a scary thing. The audience is there for you and they want you to do well. And so if you think about it that way, you get in front of people and you go, okay, these guys really want me to succeed, then immediately you'll open your body language, you'll be stronger, you'll be louder, you'll be able to really engage with them in a different way. So I would say your biggest mistake is actually mental, right? Thinking that the audience doesn't want to hear from you in the same way that you want to share with them.
Oh, that's interesting, because I've never thought of that. I thought you're going to kind of say that nobody can hear you. Your voice isn't protected.
You know what? That too, that is absolutely something else to consider, but that comes back to the breathing exercises and the vocal exercises. To me, if you've warmed yourself up properly, if you've actually taken the time and the effort and the energy to get yourself there before you start speaking, the volume shouldn't be a problem. If people can't hear you, then that is absolutely a problem. But if you've taken the time and the energy to work through how you actually come across vocally, then you should be okay in terms of that particular mistake.
So one of the things is I am not funny. I cannot tell a joke. I do not have the timing. I will screw it up for sure.
Yeah.
So how important is humor when you're speaking and doing any kind of speaking engagement?
So it's helpful, but it's certainly not required. I mean, you don't have to be going out there and telling jokes all the time, right? A lot of people assume that humor is equated to jokes, and that's not actually the case at all. You can have maybe something in your back pocket you can pull out if it's, a pre-planned joke that it'll make them laugh. But mostly what you want to do in terms of humor is you want to gauge your audience, right? If people are with you, if they're following you, and you say something funny and they laugh, excellent. But you don't need to go into it with that thought of I must be humorous or I must make people laugh. Your goal really should be to get your information across in the best way possible, to help the audience, to allow them to understand what it is that you're sharing with them. And if that winds up being humorous, great. If you've intended to have a humorous conversation with them, great. But it doesn't need to be at all. It's certainly one of those things where people think that it's more important than it is.
Yeah, I'm always worried about that part of it, because you want to engage people immediately. So
yeah,
because that the first 30 seconds is the most important to anyone getting on stage, because you almost need a hook.
Yes, but a hook doesn't need to be funny. A hook could just be something engaging or exciting or something that you want to bring to their attention immediately. It can be funny, and sometimes that's great, right? But I think that one of the things to keep in mind, especially for people who have done this a lot, is it doesn't have to be funny. It can be. Just like you don't, for example, coming back to those same ideas, you don't have to not walk across the stage. You can walk across the stage, absolutely. But planting yourself and being able to really speak to the audience from one location and really connect with them and really understand. You don't have to be funny. You don't have to do various things that people think that you have to do to really engage an audience. There's certain tricks and certain techniques and certain tools that you can use to elevate your performance that aren't necessarily the ones that people would think of, like being funny.
I think the other element too is just being, if you're not funny, at least having that energy level.
Oh yeah, energy is huge. So that is like the biggest thing. That has nothing to do really with being funny or saying anything specific, but having your energy up, having your ability to really, excite the audience because you're excited, that's key. That is absolutely key.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more still about that hook, because I know we've had conversations about this. We got right into. I know we talked a little bit about getting that hook and everything, and I know we had more conversations about stories and how lots of people use stories to create that hook as well.
Yeah.
And how I've shared with you how I think that's really evolved and there's more of a trend. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so stories. One of the things that I want to say about stories is that while they are great and while they are important, they are not the be all and end all of your talk. They should be used in some way to actually bring you into the information that you're trying to share. Because what you're trying to do when you get in front of an audience, unless the story is your presentation, which sometimes it is, what you're trying to do is you're trying to convey information. You're trying to help them. You're trying to teach them. You're trying to engage them. And the story can be a really good way to intro that. But if what you're doing is you're spending all your time on that story and you're spending all that time sort of trying to walk them through your whole life, again, if that's not the purpose of your particular talk, it can actually detract from what you're trying to teach them as opposed to enhancing it. So you want to make sure that with stories, again, you're using them strategically. It's a little story, right? It's a little story that helps you to lead into what it is you're actually teaching. So for me, for example, my story might be, I started acting when I was 9. I've been acting ever since. I love being on stage. Here's a quick little story about when I was on stage and it was really challenging for me because of X, Y, and Z, right? So that might be a little story that I might tell, but I wouldn't go into my whole history about, well, I started acting when I was 9 and then I started acting, more and I acted when I was 10 and then I did all of these different it just doesn't make sense, right? Although we did talk about the fact that when I was 10, I played Annie. I did.
Yeah, and we think I might have seen you at that time.
Yeah, it's so possible. Funny. Yeah.
You never know. It's just the world is so small. You just don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's good. And I know I was telling you that one of the things that I think it's a trend now for speaking.
It
is definitely leading into an understanding and expressing the audience pain points.
Right.
So they've come to see you, and maybe it's because of the nature of my business too. It's more like a technical, I guess it would be a term.
Yeah.
So if they're entrepreneurs, generally speaking, a lot of entrepreneurs share the same pain points. Mm-hmm. And as you know what it is.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, I guess you have to do what's comfortable, because I told you my life is being pretty calm and kind of boring.
Right.
And, well, I think so, but some people may not think so. But I mean, so I feel more comfortable sharing with the group about what their pain points are and how I definitely can relate to them.
Absolutely. And that's fine too, right? It doesn't need to be a sob story. A lot of people, again, you think, well, I've got to engage them by sharing this sob story, this horrible, thing from my past or from my experience. And that can work. That there's nothing wrong with it. It
absolutely does.
It can be great, but it's not required. It's not no stories are required. You can start off with a completely different hook. You can say, do you feel like this? And do you feel like that? Which is to your point about the pain points, right? Because you could even say, because I've been there, and just end it at that, right? It doesn't need to be this whole long, complicated story. It can be, but it doesn't need to be. And I think that it can be, but it needs to be. It doesn't need to be. That applies to a lot of things in speaking, right? And I've been saying that a bunch. You can walk, but you don't have to. You can hide behind a podium. Well, actually, you can never hide behind a podium if you want to be a good speaker. But there are certain things that you can do, but you certainly don't have to. There's a lot of freedom within the frame.
So before I move to my last question, I want to make sure we've gone all over every pillar.
Yeah.
So have we covered all of them off, or are we missing one? I feel like I'm missing one.
The only one that we haven't really talked about yet is the mindset piece. We've talked a little bit about mindset, but I think that one of the things that I want to be really clear on is figuring out what your goal is, what your one goal is for getting in front of that audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, even if you've got a speech where you've got 5 things to say, or you've got it doesn't really matter what exactly it is that you're speaking about. You need to know what your goal is, and you need to know by the end of getting off this stage, I want this audience to be engaged in this way, or I want to make sure that the goal, this one thing that I want to convey, has gotten conveyed, and that the audience completely understands what I've said. So going into it with that ability of being really, really clear on the goal, that will allow you to be a much better speaker, because you know what you're working toward. You know what you're actually trying to achieve by the end of that conversation. And I like the word conversation when it comes to speaking as well, because you're having a conversation with people, right? You're actually sharing with them in a conversational way what it is that you want to actually get across to them. And so that would be the other thing that I would really recommend, is that people think about what is that overarching one goal that I want to have completed by the end of this particular presentation.
So it could be like a call to action in some way. Not that severe, but it could be a call to action.
Absolutely, it could. Yeah. Or it could just be this thought. I want this thought to get across to them, or I want them to walk out of here really excited and really, ready to take on that next step. Like it can be rather ambiguous what the goal is. The goal just needs to be there.
That's perfect. So can you tell me, who's a speaker that you really like? I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, that's okay. One of my favorite speakers is actually one of my mentors. His name is Brendan Burchard. And he's actually the person who trained me in high performance coaching as well. And so for me, I have been to seminars of his that are 4 or 5 days, and it amazes me how he can keep the audience engaged from the very first day to the very last day. And he's got the energy, he's got the intent, he's got the knowledge. He's brilliant. He's a really brilliant speaker. So if you want to see somebody who's fantastic, you can go and look up Brendan Burchard. He's amazing.
So he has a website, obviously, of course.
Yes, I believe it's just brendan.com, actually.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'll research it and I'll put it in the link as well. So, and I'm going to go and take a look at him too. Any guy that can keep someone's attention for 5 days,
right?
Energy level up has to be amazing.
Oh, he's fantastic. He's really, truly amazing. Yeah.
Oh, well, we'll look him up for sure.
Yeah.
So our last question, and this is one of the reasons, really, ladies in biz, I really wanted all our guests to have an opportunity to do this, is to say, if you had an entrepreneur in front of you, or they were just starting out, or they're an entrepreneur today, what is the message that you'd really like to share with them?
Yeah, I would like to share that basically, if you want to get a message out there, if you want to engage an audience, there are so many ways that you can do that. It's really just a question of knowing what you want to share, knowing who you want to share it with, and allowing yourself the opportunity to really be confident in the way that you get out there. So you can do that in lots of different ways, like we've been talking about today. You can use breath, you can use voice, you can use your body language, you can use all these various different things, but the ability to get in front of an audience and share that message and be able to do so with confidence, to me, that's one of the most important things. And so spend the time, whether it's with me or whether it's with somebody else, spend the time to learn that information and to really absorb it and to really have that become part of you as you're presenting.
Well, I think it's so important that you do have professional help, because you are representing your brand today. And there's so many entrepreneurs, and because of digital marketing, you are in front. Obviously, here's a perfect example of having podcasts. You're doing Facebook Live, you're doing Instagram Live. There's so many videos. There's so many different channels that requires you to represent your brand.
Yeah.
To speak well of your brand. So I think that makes a big difference. So people definitely need your help for sure.
Well, thank you. I'll take that.
So speaking of that, one of the things we like doing too is making sure that our listeners know how to connect with you if they want to, continue their conversation. So can you just spell out your website for me?
Yeah, so it's Avra, that's Avra, Fainer, that's FAINER.com. Makes it pretty easy, avrafainer.com. You can also find me on Facebook, on Instagram, on pretty much most social with just Avra Fainer is my handle in almost everything.
Lucky just to get your name, because normally
it's a weird name. So as a result, being unique, right?
It worked for you.
It did work for me. So you can find me on pretty much any social media using that handle.
I think the new mothers that are having children now should consider about making sure their children's name are really unique in this digital world.
Just so they can get their website.
Yeah, exactly. You have to get your URL. So that's what I gave all my kids for Christmas last year. Their first and last name, url.com.
That's brilliant. That's a great Christmas present. As I should think about that as a present for people moving forward. I love it.
Yeah, it's a great gift, especially if you think someone's going to be, going to be an entrepreneur at some time in their life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no one can go and use the URL that you wouldn't like to be associated with.
Totally.
Could be a problem. Okay, well, thank you again, Avra, for doing this and giving us all kinds of tips on speaking. And so we're going to do some links, and we're going to do a PDF on how to find your
presentation persona.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so that's it. So anyway, so thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really great.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Ladies in Biz. Send us your comments on ladiesinbiz.com. We would like to hear from you.